Hello, children. It's Grandma Carla with another chapter of Freddy Goes to Florida. This is chapter 11. And now, at last, one day when the animals had been walking all morning through wild and swampy woods, they came out at the top of a long slope that went down to a wide valley in which there were many green trees and comfortable-looking white houses. A soft wind blew over the valley and puffed into their faces a sweet, delicious perfume that none of them had ever smelt before. They sniffed the air delightedly. Said Mrs. Wiggins. Isn't that good? It's better than clover. I wonder what it is. I know, said Jack. I've smelt it at weddings. See all of those little green trees down there? They're orange blossoms, and that smell is orange blossoms. Look, look, squealed Freddy. There's a palm tree. It's Florida, shouted Jinx. And all the animals shouted together, Florida, so that they could be heard for miles. And Alice and Emma hopped about and quacked and flapped their wings, and Charles crowed, and the dogs barked, and Mrs. Wiggins mooed, and Hank, the old white horse, danced around like a young colt until his legs got all tangled up and he fell down, and everybody laughed. Even the spiders raced around and around the web as they had spun between Mrs. Wiggins' horns, and the mice capered and pranced. So this is Florida, said Mrs. Wiggins. Well, well. Then they started down the slope into Florida, and as they went, Freddy made up a little song. The weather grew torrider and torrider, and the orange blossoms smelled horrider and horrider as we marched down to Florida. But the orange blossoms don't smell horrid, said Robert. I know it, said Freddy, but there isn't any other word that rhymes. Well, make up another song then, said Freddy. So Freddy sang, Oh, the winding road to Florida, it's a dusty road and long, but we animals gay have cheered the way with many a merry song. Our hearts are bold, but our homes were cold, and that is why we've come to Florida, from our far-off northern home. In Florida, where the orange blossom blows, where the alligator sings so sweet, and the sweet potato grows. Oh, that is the place where I would be, and that is the place where I am. In Florida, as happy as a clam. They all liked this song much better, and as they went along, they sang lustily. They were so glad to have reached Florida at last that they forgot all about stopping to rest that noon, and they marched on until nearly 3 o'clock. Then Mrs. Wiggins sank down under a tree beside the road. I can't go another step, she said. I'm in a dripping perspiration. Charles, I'd take it kindly if you'd fan me with your wing for a few minutes. So they all sat down, and Charles very kindly fanned Mrs. Wiggins until she had cooled off. And as they were all pretty tired and hot, they decided to camp there that night and think about what they were going to do in Florida. And then in the morning, they could go and begin doing it. So they camped under the orange trees and discussed all of the things that they could do, and at last they decided to go to the seashore. As Freddy said, he understood the sea bathing was very fine there. But how can we find the seashore? Asked Robert. You ought to have had that Robin draw it in the map. Freddy said that it would be easy to find it because Florida was a peninsula. What is a peninsula? Said Jack, and Henrietta said, Oh, don't ask him. He's just trying to show off. But Freddy said a peninsula is a piece of land that is almost surrounded by water. That means that if you walk far enough in any direction but one, you will come to the ocean. Yes, said Robert, but how do we know which direction is the one that we ought not to walk in? Why, the direction that we came from, stupid, said Freddy, and he drew a little map on the ground and showed the animals what he meant. So the next morning they started out to find the ocean. They traveled for 4 days before they saw it, away off in the distance, glittering and sparkling in the sunlight. And it was still another day before they came down to the broad beach of the yellow sand and saw the great sheet of water stretching away before them for miles and miles. They just stood and looked at it for a long time, but none of them had ever seen anything like it before. And they rushed down to the beach and swam out into the water. So for a month, they lived by the side of the ocean They rested from their long journey. They found an old barn not very far from the shore, and they cleaned it up and all lived together very happily. Every day at 4 o'clock they went in for a dip in the surf, and then they would lie around in the sand and talk until supper time. It was a very lazy and pleasant life that they lived in Florida. But after a while they got tired of doing nothing and began to long for new adventures. Besides, we ought to travel around and see the country, said Charles. When we get home and everyone asks us what Florida is like, we want to be able to tell them. So they said goodbye to the seashore and to the horseshoe crabs and the jellyfish who had made things so pleasant for them during their stay, and they set out for a tour of the state. And this is Grandma Carla, and I love you.